Who was that?
Mr. Andrews.
Oh, yeah, his daughter-in-law works, I think, up in Penny's. You know, you don't have to bother with that.
Okay.
And down here, if you're interested in Dewitt, down here right around the corner from Genesee Street is a beauty shop. And that beauty shop at one time was a church, I understand. Now this comes down from history and, you know, stories get sort of mixed up. And then it was a schoolhouse, and I went to school there as a little girl.
Which school was that? Was that the Linden
Right
School?
down here on Jamesville Road. It's now a beauty shop, and right next to the beauty shop was an old blacksmith shop. Probably, have you contacted Robert Waters? Have you talked to him? Well, he knows quite a bit about the trolley, and he...
I think Mrs. Anderson mentioned.
She mentioned the Waters Brothers as having a farm. How much of this property did your father own?
Well, all this piece here, don't ask me how much footage. And down Martin Road, well, there's 3 lots down there now. 3. He owned all of that. Wait a minute now. I believe on the deed it was 3 3/4 acres or 4 3/4 acres, more or less. Remember how the old deeds run? We had quite a time when it was being surveyed because the line was from 3 links of a chain or 4 links of a chain. So many notches in a tree, and it mentions the tannery or mill down in here. And of course, who knows where the tree was or, you know, any of those things. So it's kind of difficult. So we had quite a time getting it surveyed. And our old house stood right out in the yard here. We lived in the old house and built this house.
When was this house built?
1962. And the other one, my grandparents had lived in it, and I don't know how many families before that. The deed is so old it's almost difficult to read. And our house was the only house between here and we might just well say Genesee Street. There was the Fairbanks farm, and then down the corner of Genesee Street was another house. And after the Fairbanks farm there were 2 or 3 houses, and then a little schoolhouse and the little post office. We had a general store and a post office. And if you've gone in museums where you see cookie racks of boxes where they were tipped and the covers went, we used to have those. And that building is where, well, I don't know, there's been so many things in there. I think a beauty shop just went in there. It's the first building this side of the firehouse. But you know, when you try to reminisce and think of how things used to be, you just can't. I mean, it's all jumbled up because, like the boulevard, where the boulevard branches out now onto Genesee Street, and in that little park in between, there used to be a house sit in there, and that was Thompson Road that went each side of it, and to the east of it was the Waters farm. But I was reminiscing with Betty Smingler, and difficult to remember those places that have been torn down, you know, even just a few years ago down on Ambergate. So, of course, when you reminisce, you're getting old. So, and then there was wasn't another house till you got up here to Pebble Hill School. And you probably know that that old house at Pebble Hill School is one of the old settlers too. That was an old building. That was a farm. And the house where the church is, Pebble Hill Church, across the street, that was another big house. And we were really farmers around here.
What kind of farm did you have?
My dad didn't farm, but all the farmers around here, there was, you know, the regular farm, the cattle, and then they grew the hay and corn and that, you know, regular farms that used to have and all. And they sold their milk. Used to have, probably Mr. Andrews will tell you about that, used to have little stands built out on the road, and they'd set their milk cans out on that, and then a man would come along and pick them up and take them to the bottle. Of course, they didn't always have bottles, but they did in my time. So that's about all I guess I know about Dewitt that I can, except Randall Road here. Those were all big farms up there. In fact, the south side of Randall Road was the farm that belonged, I believe, to the Pebble Hill. It's now Pebble Hill.
Can you give us some of the names of some of the families that owned some of the farms?
Now, when you're 76 years old, you don't remember names. Oh, let me see who did that. The Hunts lived up there at one time. I don't remember. Doc Hunt, he sort of, well, he farmed it on sort of a scale. Welch's lived there at one time. And the house on this side, which is now the Pebble Hill Church, a man by the name of Conway owned it. And you probably have to check on this, but I think his wife was a Bartell of the old Bartell's brewery that made the beer. Mm-hmm. Up on the north side somewhere, I think. But I think that was, or it was in the family somewhere. Then Mrs. Thompson, who was Waters, she lived in the house down here on Genesee Street. Are you familiar with Genesee Street? You know where where the Scabilia fruit stand is?
Yeah.
Well, the house that goes with that was Mrs. Thompson's house. And that stood there all by itself. Another little house down by the feeder. And I guess, and across the street, of course, was the Waters farm. And then as you go up the boulevard, the house, oh, where would it be? Maybe where the Scotch and Sirloin is up in Shoptown was the Dady farm, John Dady farm. And then the house on Genesee Street, I don't know what it is now. It's an outreach or someplace up at the top of the hill from the light. That was Burnett Andrews' farm. And he had dairy cows. I guess everybody about had dairy cows, and then you use I suppose took your grain to the mill and had it ground, brought it back for feed. Of course, as a kid, you don't pay much attention to what goes on, But this has all been built in here.
So what kind of things did you have on your farm? You said
here,
that wasn't your income, but what did you?
Oh, well, Daddy worked for the state, and his job on the Erie Canal was planking the bridges over the feeders and roads. Like down here where the feeder goes under Genesee Street, down here. there was a bridge there where the street came, and they had to plank those bridges. And I don't really know what my dad's title was, but I think he was like a foreman of the workmen that did that, because they used to go out on the scows. And I think, no, I'm not sure about that either, but I've heard him talk about Pools Brook, and that's down east here. Everybody had a certain section, and I think he went east, and he'd be gone, and the little scows. You've probably seen the pictures of the little scows. And he used to, they'd have a little trunk, and they'd take all their clothes and their blankets. And they'd be gone for weeks. Sometimes he'd be home at night if they were right around here. But of course, transportation wasn't too easy. And then we had a streetcar that ran from Syracuse to Manlius. Another streetcar that ran from Genesee Street to Jamesville. And that was the only transportation, unless you had a horse and buggy.
Did you ever meet any of the men that he worked with?
Oh, I guess when I was a kid, I remember that I rode, which seemed to me a terrible long ways. And as near as I can figure out now, where I went was from Burdick Street in Fayetteville. We took the streetcar to Fayetteville. We got off, we walked a ways. And then we got on the little scow. And we went back to the headquarters. Now that must have been down the city somewhere, maybe along there, the Waylock or something, because we had to go through Lock. And I'm not sure, but I think that lock was, would it be between Beach Street? It was somewhere along in that section. And I thought, oh, that was the longest ride in the biggest place. And it's a hop and a skip today, you don't think anything about it. But I can remember, see, they had a cook, usually a man and his wife, that lived on the boat all the time. Excuse me. There's the siren. I heard the thing go, it had a fire somewhere. She wanted to know where the fire was.
But you turned it down.
Then I turned it down. You're going to be able to hear yourself think. So I remember the lady telling me, now don't be frightened, because I don't know now which way the locks work. They draw the water out and then fill it. And as the water goes out, of course, you go down in this like a big hole, and it gets darker and darker and darker. Of course, then they had kerosene lamps or something, no batteries. It's really turn the light. And she said, now don't be frightened, because it's going to get real dark. Well, it's a good thing she told me, because I'm a chicken. I would have been frightened. But, and in the wintertime, gosh, I don't remember what my father did in the wintertime. Isn't that? There might have been things in the state maybe to repair. And of course, your job changed usually when politics changed. Of course, everybody had their own friends that they wanted to bring in. But my dad wasn't around home, I know that. Maybe he went to work on dairy farms, because he did work on dairy farms, I don't know. Then he did work on dairy farms. But, and of course we had garden here, and believe it or not, a cow, and some pigs, and some chickens.
What were your responsibilities for the farm? Do you have to feed the animals and things like that?
Feed the chickens. I don't remember. I must have been quite small because I moved. My dad moved from Linden Road here when I was, they tell me, 3 months old. That we had a cow, but I don't ever remember the cow. And we had a barn that set about back a little bit from where this corner house sat. And we have one of those old, what do you call them? You put on your shoulders and then there's strings to hold the pails and you carry 2 pails, you know. So we had to go over the bank here. There was 2 gorgeous springs. And that's where our drinking water came from. We had to go down there and get drinking water. And I have the cowbell and the leather thing that they had around the cow's neck. That's the only thing I can remember them, having that cow. And then, of course, in all the old houses, they had cisterns. You know what they are? For washing and all of that. But the drinking water, we used to have to go. And my dad, there's a big bank here, and he dug little holes to make steps for us to go down. I guess we lived quite primitive, didn't we? According to today. And I don't think there was many people that worked in factories or anything at that time when I was little, because it was all dairy farms and farms around here. So, and from here to Fayetteville even, I guess. But I guess as a kid, if you get enough to eat and you're having a good time and you got a place to sleep, you don't know what else goes around. But it's sad because my husband and I have got talking, and just since we've been married, we'll be 51 years in September, that in the time that he has lived here, the changes, that we didn't take pictures. Like our Dewitt Community Church, and this little triangle I was telling you down here, our church sat in the farther end. The church was up here, and the little house was here, and the Thompson room on the inside. And it's sort of hard today to picture that there. And what was there? Oh, there was another church.
Was that the church that you went to?
That's the only church we had here. Until, late years, and the other churches have come in. And I guess that's why it was a Methodist church. And I think they probably changed it for all the different people to go here, because it was the only church. If you didn't have a car, there were streetcars and buses, and along the last on Sundays they run every hour or something, which made it very inconvenient. And so that was the only church we had here for a long, long time. So.
Did you live in the other house even after you got married?
Yeah, my mom was dead, and I kept house for my dad, and then I got married, and we stayed right there. And he died in 61. And that house then was probably, well, we did look it up in the deed once, but I've forgotten, but we figured it was about 200 years old. It had, like all the old houses, beams, you know, they cut down the trees and just chop the notches out. There was a lady in town that was quite upset because we were going to tear it down. But it hadn't had too good care over the years. And it was just all, you know, the beams where you could put a screwdriver and it would go right up there. So, but it was a nice old house when you were living in it. It was home, you know, and no central heat.
Do you know who owned it before your father bought it?
Well, my grandfather owned it. My dad, I understand it was one of those family things that if one of the family would come home and take care of the parents, they would get the house. And my dad was the only one that seemed to want to do it. The others had other things to do. And of course we only then lived down on Linden Road, which is down, it's one of those little houses right down by the Erie Canal Park down there. I don't know which house it was really. But, so maybe he was the nearest one and one that lived in the country maybe. But I take my father's family was brought up there. And my grandfather was a carpenter, so they say, of course, we never knew him. He died before we were born.
Had he built the house himself?
No. People had lived in it before that. I think, I can't tell you the name of the people. But I think that's why we were figuring back that two families had owned it before my grandfather. And my dad was 90, I think he would have been 91 in about 3 weeks, or 90, I don't remember which. And so the house was at least 90 years old, you know, more than that then when they moved here. So it seems like another life, really, you know, when you were a kid and you look back at all of those things. But it's interesting. And then, of course, the old mill up at Jamesville, I don't know. I don't know about this mill up here, whether that was a mill for food, you know, grain for food, or whether it was just for grain for the animals. But and that is why I suppose they built it there, for the water, Butternut Creek, and the feeder. And see, this little creek here used to feed the feeder, so that they say this estate, the state owns each side of that creek. I don't know now whether, as long as they don't use the Erie Canal as the canal anymore, that holds true or not. But they had the boats. The boats used to have to go up the feeder. I don't know why. There was some gates. No, I don't know where they are. Mr. Andrews will tell you that. I think down there somewhere are some gates that they used to open up the water in or run off or something. And the boats used to have to go up there. I know they used to go up there to feed, or maybe take care of the sides or something. But I never knew of my dad. Betty Smingler asked me if my dad repaired the locks, but I don't think so. I think that was another trade, you know, because they were, well, I guess they were planks at one time, but that was different section and different thing, I guess. But
Well, there weren't any locks right on this section, not from Syracuse.
not in level, I don't think it was only. And that's where I'm trying to think where the lock was that we went through between Fayetteville, but there's like a hill. But I don't know whether the canal. See, I can't even picture where the canal used to go since they took it out of the city. But there was one there. I don't think there was. There was the viaduct down here. I don't think there was any locks. But it must have been like, you know, in the city there's Fayette Street. When you come in, you have to go down the hill and down Genesee Street. So if the waterways went that way, maybe that's down Maple Beach, somewhere along that. Maybe there's, I'm sure they'd probably have it down the museum or someplace, know where they were anyway. But I never thought about lock being out here. I remember going through one anyway. It was kind of scary. But we really were farm country out here.
Did you ever meet any of the children from the canal boats? Did they maybe go to your school or anything like that?
From whom?
From the canal boats, any of the
No.
children? Where did you go to high school after you finished going to school?
Fayetteville.
And where was that school? Do you know?
Well, that's on the main street. I'm not sure, but I almost think that's where they call Wellwood now. It's right on the main street. No, I didn't go there. I'm sorry. It's where my son went. I went to Fayetteville School, is where the Fayetteville Fire Department is now.
Where did you go shopping? Were there local stores around here that you could?
The one
shop in?
local store that was, what I tell you, is down, well, probably you know it better, by next to the barbecue, the little building next to the barbecue. That was the grocery store and the post office. And, of course, you got everything there. It was like a general store. And then a few years later, there was one down a little farther, one across the street. But like I heard my mom tell it, my dad would have to go to Fayetteville to get, you got your molasses in a gallon jug, and you'd have to go to Fayetteville to get that. It must have been a bigger store, you know, for barrels of molasses. And that's the only store. Or you had to go into Syracuse. Of course, when I got big enough to go shopping, we used to go down Syracuse. And I've heard them tell that when you got down to Jefferson or Onondaga Street, you were way out of the city. And probably the stores were Day Brothers and Witherell's, and of course Chappell's. And then there was a store that was called Hundred and Tuppence.
Called what?
Hundred and Tuppence.
Was that a grocery store? Or
No,
department
that
store?
was a department store at the corner of Fayette and Salina on the northeast corner. Would be the corner opposite across Fayette Street from where Woolworths were. And the meat, when I used to go shopping with Mom, so we'd go, this was really when we got advanced, I guess, you know, we had the streetcar to go more often. Up on the north side was a meat market called Daniel Horns. They had sawdust on the floor, and that's where we used to go get your meat. That was the
Did you have your milk delivered locally?
Well, when my dad worked on the dairy farm, he usually brought the milk from there. I mean, you know, he didn't have no pasteurized milk, and the other. But, of course, late years, the Fairbanks farm that I'm telling you about that was right down here, they just tore the old house down to make parking lot for the school. One of the sons had a milk, you know, pasteurized milk in that late years. But it must have been when my dad got through at the state, then he went to work at the dairy farm, and we always got our milk from the dairy farm. But it was delivered to the house. I don't know, we never went to the store to get it, so it must be, you know, well, maybe they had no way of keeping it. It's funny how you take so much for granted, isn't it?
Do you know whose farm he worked for? The name of the farm?
Well, he worked for the Burnett Andrews farm that's over on Genesee Street. And he worked for Mr. Hunt that had the farm up here where Pebble Hill is. And before that, I don't know any, you know, if he worked around the farms, I don't remember who the farmers were, because there were farmers up Randall Road, but I never remember looking for that. And then, let me see, in 1926, of course, I guess then maybe the dairy farms were going. He went to work for St. Mary's Cemetery. And then when he got through there, he sort of went out on his own, taking care of people's lawns, mowing lawn, taking care of flower gardens. And he did that until he couldn't, you know, do anything anymore. And so, but he got busy. He was a little guy, but boy, he could work around time. About all I know about that probably Mrs. Hamilton, because she lives over in that section, will tell you about. It just come to me that the top of the hill here, you know, as you leave Dewitt really, and you go up the hill there where Howard Johnson's used to be, or what is there, Manor House, the furniture store. Well, right in there was what they called an old toll gate. You know, where you had to pay to go through. And, or Betty Smingler probably, because I think she lived in a house back of the toll gate.
Did your husband grow up in this area?
No. He was born in Auburn.
How did you meet?
We both worked at the same place. And then he was born in Auburn, then his folks moved to Syracuse, and they lived in a house in what's now Thorndon Park. Then they bought a house on Fayette Street, and that's where he lived when they were married. But we both worked at the same printing plant. I don't know whether it was a lucky day or not.
What did you do there?
I was a proofreader, and he sat tight. And then eventually he started his own business, which our son is running now. He has it.
Which was that?
Mason Printing. the day 6 years doesn't seem like it was 6 years ago. So,
Did you stop work after you got married?
I worked a couple years, year and a half, I guess. We have a son 49 years old. So okay.
How many brothers and sisters did you have?
I have one sister. So she lives in Jersey. If she was here, she could remember, you know, the things, because being the older, I suppose she was knew more what was going on. It's like I said, it really is sad that you don't keep some things, pictures or things, you know. And I'm sure that I've probably thrown things out. After my dad died, Dad and I, after my mother died, we went through things, threw a lot of stuff out. And after Dad died, had there been any pictures, we didn't know who they were, so out they went. But she would remember some of them. I don't even remember the men's name Daddy worked for, because he did have a picture, and I don't know where that is, of, I think that was probably the office men and the crew that he worked with, because there was some from Fayetteville, and I can't remember that man's name. And I know there was a Mr. Barnett that worked. I guess probably I remember him because he used to come and visit us. You know, after they were not in the state anymore. And movies. If we'd only had movies in those days, how wonderful that would have been, huh?
Where did you go if you wanted to go out somewhere?
Syracuse. Of course, when I was dating, there was a lot of movies. And, you know, but as a child, I used to visit some cousins that lived Walnut Avenue, and Fayette Street. And there was a little movie down on Irving Avenue. And the time that you've probably heard about the perils of Pearl White or something like that, you know, she was always being put in and going to be sawed up by the villain, and then, you know, continued next week. Little bit of a movie, and it cost you a dime to go. And of course that was a big treat to me, you know, go to the movies. But there was nothing here. I mean, all we had here was our church suppers, and of course there was the hotel where Walter White's was. But that in my time was just a regular old bar room. And I don't know whether they had hotel rooms or not at that time. But that's all it was. There was no entertainment, only what you had in the church. And then, of course, in those days, at the end of each school year, you had a school picnic. And your Sunday school had a school picnic. And in later years, there was Suburban Park, and Fiddler's Green, which is toward Janesville, and then Long Branch was a beautiful park. But that was the only places. Something, isn't it? To look back at it. Oh dear.
Do you remember much about your school? The school that you went to? What was it like?
Well, it was a one-room schoolhouse with 6 grades, heated with a wood or coal stove. You went outside, bathroom outside. But it was a lot of fun, really, And I don't know, we never seemed to have any trouble. I mean, we had good teachers, I guess, that didn't, you wouldn't get away with very much. She must have had to, because lots of times, although maybe there would only be 2 in a grade, I mean, when you have 6 grades, and I can't tell you how many pupils they had. I had a picture of that too, and I don't know what I did, how many. There wasn't too many in there. So the schoolhouse would be full. But see, after 6th grade, you had to go somewhere else. 7th and 8th, we went to Fayetteville. And it was rather difficult. I can understand the children today, because the only music that we really knew was singing. And when we went to Fayetteville, those children had the scale, and learned music from the bottom up. And it's just a different way of teaching. I mean, the teacher couldn't, but when you went, you can see where, when you move around from that type of school, I think you have better understanding of what some of the kids today have when they're moved around. Of course, they have more advantages, but it's that much of a change for them. And you're sort of like you always have missed something, So, but I mean, everybody seemed to be that way, so I mean, you didn't really realize how much you'd miss because you never had it. And one of the teachers was Miss Babcock. She lived over in Linda. I don't know where the other one was, where she was. It's the only 2 I remember. Because I guess if you got a good teacher, you probably kept them. I think you're going to talk with Ruth Edwards, or Ruth Wilcox too, aren't you? Are you the one that's going to talk to her? Mm-hmm. Well, I went to school with her, and I went to school with Mrs. Hamilton. Not many of us left around here, I guess, that used to go to school together. But Ruth, I guess, graduated before I did. And her son and my son are very, very good friends. They just like each other, so that's good. But, I guess you made your own amusement. For instance, somebody said to me the other day, "You never had a bicycle?" And I said, "No." I mean, you had little dirt roads and a little path that went up and down, and my folks couldn't afford a bicycle. And you didn't I don't even know as men had bicycles to ride to work. I mean, it was rather dangerous. You had little narrow roads, there's just horse and wagons. And we were saying that if they made a path, it was somewhere where they could make a path. They made boards in a triangle and took a horse along, and this is the way you plowed a path, if you could. But the snow was so deep then, you couldn't have plowed it anyway. You had to walk on the road, you know. And they used to have to plow the roads just the best that they could with the horses and bobs. So I guess you made your own entertainment and amusements.
Did you ever swim in the canal? Mrs. Hamilton told us they used to do that.
No. Water to me is all right, long as my feet are on the land. Well, see, she lived right on the edge. Oh, what was the question you asked me?
Swimming in the canal.
No. We used to wade in the creek and fall in many a time, but no, I never learned to swim. I guess I really am afraid of water and I'm afraid to fly, so I'm just chicken from here to here. But they did, it was clear, it was nice clean water. And I had an uncle, now that you speak of that, because this is when I was talking to Betty, I said, no, I was getting Mrs. Hamilton to live where my uncle lived. The house down on the boulevard that is, what is it, Huckleberry Finn, the wicker furniture. The back of that house is where my uncle lived. And Mrs. Hamilton lives on Butternut Drive. Do they call it Butternut Drive now? Or she did. She don't live there now, but I mean, that was her home there. Mrs. March lives there now, which was Mrs. Hamilton's sister. That was their own home. Oh, yes, they used to swim. Wasn't it so fun? Well, Mrs. Hamilton lives. Well, she probably told you where she. You've already talked to her,
Yeah,
right?
but we talked to her at the library.
Oh, uh-huh.
So we didn't know where she lived.
Well, she lived, if you go down Kinney Road, you know, which is the back of Shopping Town, and you go by the Shopping Town and you go up the hill. Well, just before you go over the bridge over 481, you turn to your left, and you go down there. No, I think that's how she. They have changed Butternut Drive, but I think that's Butternut Drive. Because there was a house on the corner that was Spencer, and you turned right around that house and went down. Perhaps they don't. Yeah, I think they do. Or maybe it's just a little turn off of Butternut Drive. Because I think some of her father's farm is now part of Whitechapel Cemetery. Oh, they used to fish. I imagine my husband was gone down there and fish too. They used to get fish out of this old creek. They were good and clean, but now You know, after it started to build up, I just imagined sewage went in there. But we've had muskrats down there. They say they'll only live in clear water, clean water. We're still in the country with muskrats and skunks and rabbits. But most everybody has moved away. That probably I went to school with. Because I expect maybe some of the children that I went to school with was, you see the farms, a lot of them have a tenant house on it, and people would work and their children would go to school, and then when they got through or something, they would move on. But I would show you the picture if I knew what it was, but I don't know. Because I remember when I got it up one time when my sister was here, we couldn't remember who all the kids were. You know, they grew up and moved away, so you just don't have any connections with them. You don't remember them. But I think maybe we had more fun sometimes than we do today.
Why do you say that?
Oh, I don't know, maybe it was a simpler life and you enjoyed, you know, more. You didn't have the amusements, maybe. And what you did have, you enjoyed. But then, I mean, people seem to enjoy everything today, so maybe it's just the way you look at things. Maybe you're getting old and crotchety, too, you know? You know, we have a habit of doing that. But I don't know. It seems like today, and a lot of it's our own fault, but it's such a rat race. You know, it's like, say you don't take time to smell the roses. But whose fault is it? Ours, because we don't stop. So what is this, going in historical, or what is this?
This is for the Dewitt Community Library,
Oh,
so that if people want to know about Dewitt history.
Oh, yeah. Well, maybe I better go up there and read up something and bring back things that I've forgotten, huh? Oh, dear, oh, dear. You know, one of the Fairbanks family still lives here in DeWitt.
Do you know
Yeah.
what her name is?
It's Mrs. Ray Fairbanks. Hazel. And it was her husband that had the milk business, pasteurizing milk. Yeah, you have to be sure and put in there about that the Walter White was an old, what did they used to call them in olden days? Taverns?
You tell us.
Because it's gone, you know. If somebody comes in and wonders, you know, about the Walter White was the old tavern. I've forgotten. Somebody said there was a date on that, but I don't remember. If my husband was here, he could tell you. But it was real old. It had been there for, I most think it told about that in the paper when they had the fire, didn't they?
Could be.
How old that building was. I know I didn't like it. Yeah. All those old houses are gone. You see how that you talk about that. From the schoolhouse, which is now the beauty shop, there was a house that stood on the corner down Genesee and Jamesville Road that belonged to the blacksmiths. And then he went into, he had a little grocery store and a gas station. You know how they always used to go grocery store and then you had a gas station next to it? And that was there on that corner for a good number of years. And that was Fabing, Casper Fabing, I guess.
How do you spell that?
C-A-S-P-E-R. C-A-S-P-E-R. Fabing. F-A... I think it was F-A-B-I-N-G. People used to say sometimes it's an F-A-B-I-A-N. But they said Fabing, so I think it had the Y on it. And he was there for a long... I can't even remember when they tore the house down. Isn't that terrible? That's what old age does to you, see? So watch out. All the other old houses.
Do you remember anything about the old house that you lived in?
Do I what?
Remember anything about the old house that your father had, that your grandfather had? You talk a little bit about what it was like.
Well, it was just one of those old big farmhouses that, for instance, they in the upstairs in the bedrooms you didn't have halls and rooms. It was like your living quarters. You went from one room into the other, you know. So if you had guests, you went to bed first, or your guests went to bed first. You put them in the back bedroom, and then your downstairs was the same way. And we had a kitchen, and in those days you had an old-fashioned parlor and a living room and a bedroom, 2 bedrooms downstairs. But I've heard my mother tell that when they moved there, the ones that I knew was a living room was my grandmother's kitchen, because it was a huge, big room. And also I was told that as you went out of our kitchen was what we called a woodshed. You kept your wood in there, and then when you got coal, you built a bin in there for your coal. And then there was a stairs that went up to what we called the attic, and my mother always had plans of making another bedroom up there and making a kitchen out of what was the woodshed. But, and they said that our kitchen, that we used as a kitchen, and those rooms there were another house that stood right out here and had been moved up against that house. You know, so it was really 2 houses. And it probably was true because when they were digging here for our sewer, I guess, they came and they said whatever was down there, they found all these stones. Like, our house had like no foundation, you know, they were just stones piled up, you know, certain flat stones. They couldn't figure out what they'd run into with all these stones, so we figured, well, gee, then it come to me that, you know, the story had come down that there was a house there. And we used that in the winter to dry our clothes, because the winters were so you never hung your clothes outdoors. And we heated with stoves. And And the upstairs, the only heat there was a stovepipe that went up from your main stove, you know, and out. So it was chilly some mornings. But in those days, you had new clothes. You wore enough clothes to wear you out. Trying to keep warm, you know. But it was a nice old house. I mean, it was, well, I guess because it was my home until I moved in here, you know. But I don't miss it. People think it's funny I don't miss it, but knowing the condition that it was in, it was a landmark, but if it had been kept up, it would have probably been a nice house. And the floors in the house were these great big wide boards, and then they never come together, so they used to seal, you know, in between where the boards came together, but they were those great big wide boards. And I don't know, the man that graded or something wanted some of them, and some of the beams. But when they come to tear it down, it had no bed. They were all just sculling. We were lucky to get out of it, I guess. And the yard, we didn't have all this yard. My dad sort of, and we all have worked to do it, was like field grass right up around, you know. My mother had a little flower bed out the kitchen window and a few lilacs. And of course we were on a higher bank. We've had it graded down. We had five stairs going down into the road. It was that high. It sure is different. But I like it the way it is now. You know, some people say I wouldn't live in Dewitt now since Shopping Town has been there. It's built up, but I like it. If you have lived where you're one house and you look out at night and you can't see any lights, it's kind of a lonesome feeling. If that's what you like, that's good. But I like to see lights. I think it's a friendly feeling. It's a good thing we all don't like the same thing. And our barn burned down. And we had one of those old-fashioned cradles. It was huge. A youngster could sleep in it till they were 4 years old. Set in the standard, and then it rocked, you know, and that burned up. And I mourned the cradle, and all my father's tools and everything was up in there. But the cradle went, so that was, nothing else was in any value, according to me. And it was the prettiest wood.
When did it burn?
Oh, years. I was still a kid, I guess. But one of the farmers that had the land there, he set his cornfield, you know, the corn, set it on fire. And of course we had no water, only the cistern. And of course there was no way of saving it and everything. Of course there was no animals. That was long past when we had animals. But it was sort of a store place, you know. So that cradle. And now they're making reproductions of those cradles. So. But it's funny what some particular thing you wanted. I mean, you would think ordinarily you'd worry about, well, my dad's tools and what's he going to have to use, you know. But that cradle, I remember I used to have to go up there in the hayloft and rack it every time I went. That's what I know. I'll see if you